Welcome to the Resilient Retail Game Plan, a podcast for anyone wanting to start, grow or scale a profitable creative product business with me, Catherine Erdley. The Resilient Retail Game Plan is a podcast dedicated to one thing, breaking down the concepts and tools that I've gathered from 20 years in the retail industry and showing you how you can use them in your business. This is the real nuts and bolts of running a successful product business, broken down in an easy, accessible way. This is not a podcast about learning how to make your business look good. It's the tools and techniques that will make you and your business feel good. Confidently plan, launch and manage your products, and feel in control of your sales numbers and cash flow to help you build a resilient retail business. Welcome. It is episode number 138 of the Resilient Retail Game Plan, and I'm your host, Catherine Erdley. I'm also the founder of the Resilient Retail Club, which is my membership group for product businesses. Head over to resilientretailclub.com, find out more about the club and what it can offer you. If you have ever wanted more support with either your mindset or growing your sales, understanding your numbers better, and also how to just run your business effectively and efficiently, then the Resilient Retail Club is for you. We offer so much, from live events to our private Facebook group, as well as a huge library of courses. And I also have a brand new private members podcast. So if you enjoy the Resilient Retail Game Plan on a Thursday, we have a special members only podcast that's going out on a Monday and will give you pointers for your week ahead to get you in the right frame of mind and ready to go for the week. So go check it out, resilientretailclub.com. I'm really excited about today's episode. In fact, the next 4 episodes are making up a bit of a mini series. The theme is all about building your business on a budget. And I am talking to 4 fantastic business owners that have built their businesses through organic means. In other words, they have gone out there and built their communities, their businesses, without the use of paid advertising or other paid means of promoting themselves. And we get right into the nitty-gritty of how they've done it, starting with the fabulous Laura Schofield. Laura is the founder of a fantastic specialist shoe brand, which she's going to tell us all about, Otto and Ivy. And I have known Laura since about 2019. We're going to discuss how we met in the episode. It's a really great episode, jam-packed full of some fantastic ideas about how Laura has not only built her brand, but taken her customers on her journey with her. And I can't wait to share it with you. Laura, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. Do you want to kick us off by telling everyone about you and your brand?
Yeah, so I'm Laura. I am 6'1" with size 9, UK size 9 feet. And basically, I could never get shoes to fit. That's the whole crux of Otto and Ivy. If you've got feet that are a size 8 and over, the high street just doesn't really cater for you very well. And high street brands that do sort of think, oh, I might make a few in a size 9 or a size 10. They try and appeal to everyone because it's already a bit of a niche, and they therefore appeal to no one. So they go, oh, we'd just make black shoes because then everyone will wear black shoes. But it just means that you don't have those kind of exciting shoe moments that you see in films or that I know my friends have. And I would look through windows of shoe shops. I'd go out, I come from London originally. And so I had access to all the shoe shops that you could possibly want. But I'd just look through the window and know that nothing would fit me. Or you'd go in there and you'd ask them whether particular shoes went up to that size, and they'd go, oh no, actually, size 9 is a very big size. And you're like, I know. And so I had this just real difficulty with getting shoes to fit. And I don't come from a footwear background at all. I don't come from a particularly entrepreneurial background. My parents aren't in business. That my parents have a brilliant work ethic. They work incredibly hard, but they would admit themselves business people. They are not. They're a little bit more cautious as well. So it just wasn't my background at all. And I actually wanted to be a TV presenter. That was what I had always wanted to do. And I left university when I was 21. I started working behind the scenes at Channel 5, and then I went freelance, and I ended up getting some presenting. And I sort of then carved a bit of a niche for myself in shopping television, which was never really the plan. And I kind of went in to shopping telly sort of thinking, oh, I'll get some experience. And I I guess I went in wanting to be Holly Willoughby and came out wanting to be Alan Sugar. I I went in wanting to be a presenter, but actually I just fell in love with selling, and I fell in love with business, and I fell in love with the excitement of getting a product and, not really knowing whether it was going to do well or not, and then seeing the hundreds of people coming through on the screen. And I just found it so incredibly exciting. And I've always, even though I perhaps didn't really know how to sell, and I'd say I was even a little bit uncomfortable, which I didn't realize. It was kind of down to perhaps some of the way I'd been brought up a little bit, that, we didn't really talk about money very much. And it was kind of always, I was brought up in the church as well. So it's very much like, money isn't the be all and end all. And so I was almost a bit embarrassed about selling. But the thing that I had always been really good at was telling stories. I just could always make something that was probably very ordinary and very boring and seemed like there was no story there, and I could draw the stories out of it. My friends had always said to me, I'd tell them a bit of gossip and I'd just be able to, everyone would be listening and I'd be like, oh my goodness, I forgot to tell you. And I'd draw out this like long-winded story that probably could have been told in about a minute. I'd spend like 15 minutes telling all the juicy details and all the information. And I loved it. I'm a people person. I love making connections with people. I think I've got quite good instincts and quite good intuition. I understand how what makes people tick. Not always, I don't understand everyone, and I don't claim to, but I definitely feel like I can make connections with people quite well, and I can tell stories. And so I had that foundation when I went into shopping telly, and I learnt as well when I was there a lot of skills. So I had the kind of, I guess I had the sort of emotional intelligence to start off with, but then I was also taught the real skill of, this is how you close a sale. This is how you show that something's going to sell out. This is how you create a feeding frenzy and all this kind of thing. And so I worked in shopping TV for 15 years. I worked for QVC for a few years as a guest presenter. And then I worked at a channel called TJC as a main presenter for nearly 10 years. And I learned so much there, but I knew, and it was lovely, I really enjoyed it, but I knew it wasn't everything that I wanted to do. And there was something missing. And while I was there at TJC, I started doing a fashion blog for tall women. And I loved writing. And again, I loved telling stories and connecting with these women who I had a lot in common with. And so I started this blog called All the Tall Things. And at the time, it was just a kind of creative outlet that I felt like I didn't necessarily have at the shopping channel. And so I was showing off like fashion finds that I'd found. I was showing people where they could potentially find some shoes or potentially find some clothes for tall women. And I built up this really lovely, not huge, I didn't have millions of followers. It was just this really lovely, loyal community of women. And I remember at one stage, I'd had my 2 children. Arthur was very, very little. And I had the fashion blog going and I was working at the shopping channel, and I was thinking, I got to one of those points, like a bit of a midlife crisis kind of thing, or I can't remember, I was sort of early 30s. And I was thinking, so maybe not midlife, let's hope not. But, I had one of those moments where I thought, is this what I want to do? And I decided to write down every skill that I had. And I wrote down everything that I loved doing, even if money was no object. And the things that were coming up were things like the storytelling, things like the tool blog that I was doing. I loved tool fashion. And I had all this together, and it just was saying to me, you need to be starting a tool fashion brand. Like, this is what you really want to do. And I knew that clothing was getting a little bit easier for tall women. And I knew that I could be quite resourceful when it came to clothes. So it might be that I'd find a maxi dress in H&M, but I could wear it as a skirt, a strapless maxi dress. I could wear it as a skirt, that sort of thing. But one thing you can't do with shoes is cheat them. You can't. Like, me and you might have different shaped bodies, but we could maybe wear the same t-shirt and it would just look slightly different, but we cannot wear the same shoe. And so it was something that just became, I was like, oh, there just aren't the shoes out there, but how do I start? And I had no idea. And I just started with Google, and I started making connections with other shoe brands as well. So, I was careful that it would never be someone that could potentially become a competitor. So it would be people that were doing shoes for regular feet, or they had maybe another problem that they were dealing with. And I made connections with people that way. And then they would lead me to someone else that would help me. And I started talking to footwear designers, and I got on a plane and started visiting factories as well and talking to them about the kind of thing that I wanted to do. And
you came to our workshop.
I came to your workshop as well. And that was a really big, I guess, a big confidence boost as well, because I remember you girls being really encouraging and saying, no, I believe that you can do it. And I went to your How to Start a Fashion Brand workshop.
Yeah, which I used to run with Joanne Griffin, Elizabeth Stiles.
Yeah.
That was one of the sort of first things that I did almost when I started my business. So probably like 2018, 2019. Pre-COVID, yeah, for sure. We would do these in-person days, and it was amazing. And it's always really nice actually to see where people are at when, like people did start their brands and build them. And it's amazing actually.
Yeah. Oh, no, it was such a lovely day, and it was such a lovely group of women as well. And I just went away from that more determined and feeling, just armed with a lot more knowledge and a lot more confidence as well. Even now, I still refer back to the principles that I learned in that workshop. So things like, taking the brand on the journey with you, which crosses over a little bit with what I've done with Shop and Telly as well. And also, just your good old margin calculations and things like that. That's always in the back of my head. Like, what would Catherine do? What would Catherine do? That's definitely stayed with me. But I think, the key for me has been taking the customers on that journey. And I've never been scared to really put myself into my brand and put myself on Instagram so that people know they're buying from Otto and Ivy, but they also know they're buying from me, because I know all too well, when I first started at the shopping channel, I think I assumed that people just would buy from me because they were used to buying from the shopping channel, but they do not. They have their favorite presenters. People buy from people. They really...
Even at that level.
Oh, God, yeah.
People are buying from people.
Absolutely. So people would say, oh, no, I buy my handbags from Laura and I buy my Tanzanite from Chloe. And they would really need to trust you. They'd really need to get to know you. And I even remember when I got pregnant, because I had my first baby when I was working there, and I got pregnant. And I remember people were so invested in my pregnancy story and talking to me loads more. And I ended up selling loads more just because they felt like they knew more. And I think when you open up to people realize you're a real person and you become more trustworthy as well. And I think because I'd had this blog too, and I'd been taking people on this journey already, I think people really knew that I wasn't just in it for money. And I'm not saying that, there aren't businesses where you can just be in it for money, but I think people really knew that this was such a deep passion of mine, that I desperately wanted to serve these women, and I desperately wanted them to have the shoes that they'd dreamed of, that they'd never been able to have before. That was a big desire of mine, not the money coming through in the bank account. I know that's important. Don't look at me like that, Catherine. I know it's important.
No, I think it's wonderful. And I love it when you talk about, because, obviously I follow you on Instagram. I love it when you talk about you want to create shoes that people would say, do you do this in smaller sizes? Like you wanted to create the reverse, where you were always saying, like, does this come in a larger size? And now now people are saying to you, oh, could you make it in my size? And you're like, no.
I know. I love it. That's honestly my favorite feedback. And it makes me feel a little bit evil to say that. But it's when I get emails from people and they say, oh, I found your site and I'm a little bit confused. Do you not realize that the average shoe size for a woman is 5? Why are you starting it at an 8? And I'm like, because it's a specialist brand for tall women. But that is the very best thing. It's people saying to me, oh, I wish my feet were shorter, because that feels to me like it's just changing the game, because I hated that I couldn't get shoes in my size when I was younger. I've had full-on tears on shoe shopping trips. And it's so funny because people don't realize how important shoes are. And it can sound very frivolous and it can sound a little bit trivial. There's this very famous Marilyn Monroe quote that's on lots of like walls in universities and whatever, or it was years ago. And it would say, give a girl the right pair of shoes and she can conquer the world. And that does sound quite trivial, but if you need a pair of shoes for a job interview, or you need a pair of shoes for a first date, or you're giving a presentation, or you're being a bridesmaid, and you can't access 99% of the shoes that are out there, it is very, very difficult, and you're not going to perform at your best. And I think if you know that you can just walk into a shoe shop and buy anything off the rack, you take it for granted and you don't realize just how difficult that can be. So I always maintain that shoes are, I almost want them to be an afterthought. Like, I want women to fall in love with my shoes, but I also want them to just be able to live their lives, and for shoes to almost be so far down their list of priorities that they can just get on with their life. that's my dream.
I love it. It's and the name Otto as well. Otto for 8, right? And Ivy,
yes,
climbing.
Yes. So I wanted to, because I didn't want it to be too prescriptive in its title, because I know that I've shopped at other tool brands before, and there is a tool brand that has been on the high street before, and a lovely tool brand started by a very lovely lady. But I remember holding the handbags and feeling embarrassed on the tube because it would say tool in the title. And I knew that people would be looking at me and then like looking at the handbag and going, oh yeah, no, that does make sense. She's tall. And it just made me cringe. And I wanted to have something that had meaning. So Otto is Italian for 8. And Ivy is obviously a climbing plant. So it's a way of saying 8 and rising, or 8 and above, but without saying my big canoe feet or my, extra long boat shoes, because and that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I just hated the feeling of shopping in a specialist store. And I wanted people to be able to say it with pride. So if someone said, oh my gosh, where are your shoes from? You can say Otto and Ivy, rather than say, it's from bigshoeshop.com kind of thing. So that might exist. I don't know, but it wasn't for me. I wanted something that didn't feel...
It's a nice feeling.
Yeah, that didn't feel like a specialist experience.
Yes. So fast forward then, so 2023, do you want to kind of touch a little bit about, what you've achieved with Otto and Ivy? Because it's quite astounding, actually. I've been following you since the beginning, so it's quite wonderful to see where you're at now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, life has completely changed. So basically, I've been doing the business for 3 years now. So it launched January 2020. So literally about 4 weeks before the pandemic hit the world and just went completely crazy. And I was making shoes in Italy and China at the time. So they were like the first things to go. All the factories shut down. It was just madness. But it has grown really steadily. And what I would say as well is that a lot of people are scared to start a business in retail at the moment because of, the word recession and the fact that everything is a little bit more up in the air and shops are closing. I actually think it was the very best time for me to start, not knowing the good times and starting my business knowing that freight prices were expensive and that I needed to build that into my cost price, and knowing such and such meant that I was able to grow without making these major changes, major adjustments, getting rid of things. It's like I hit the ground running at a time when it was so difficult that it has fully prepared me, I hope. You never say never. There could be an alien invasion that I'm not prepared for. But I feel like it has prepared me, it's future-proofed the business a bit, because I started. I don't know the good old days. It's not that things have got worse. And it is, what's exciting is that it's grown so much year on year. And actually, it's a tiny percentage of my customer base. It's a tiny percentage of people, women who have big feet, that actually know about Otto and Ivy yet. And that is so exciting, because I feel like I've literally just touched the tip of the iceberg. And part of the reason for that, which seems a bit bizarre when I tell people, but until this year, so until I hit 3 years, I'd never spent a single penny on marketing of any kind. So I have done it all through organic social media. And through building my email list through the organic social media. I would share things on Facebook and Instagram. I would write blog posts, and that is how I built my business. So I have never even boosted a post. I have now, actually, in the last 3 weeks, I've started boosting posts, which is quite exciting. But I never did. And the reason for that, because a lot of people would say, well, why didn't you? Because if you're doing, I did £250,000 orders or £250,000 worth of orders, not £250,000 orders, £250,000 worth of orders in 2022. And people would say, well, you could have done 4 times that if you were advertising. But I needed to really refine my product. Bear in mind, I've never worked in footwear before.
Yeah.
So I was taking lots of expert advice and I was getting lots of information, but I've never worked in footwear before. So I had to know that the product was right. I had to know that there were people out there. I hate waste of any kind. And I hate waste in terms of money, but I hate waste in terms of materials as well. So I would make a run of 150 pairs of shoes. And sometimes it would sell out in the first week or the first couple of days. But it just meant that I could then get feedback from people and they might say, oh, it's coming up a little bit small or a little bit big. And then I could make tweaks for the next runs. And I feel like now, with 3 years under my belt and a really good, loyal customer base, that actually I can expand more and I can branch out and find more of my tribe and more of my customers. So yeah, that's been the reason for it. And also, it's at the end of the day, when you first start, you have limited funds and you're doing everything on a shoestring, and it is expensive to start a shoe brand. It's not something that you can really start on a very small budget, which is annoying, but you have to put a big investment in. So you have to know that you have to feel like it's going to work. You
have to know that you're going to sell it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And I did so much research. I did a survey on my blog at the beginning, just before I started looking at factories, to see if it was a viable option. I kind of knew in my head that it was. And I got 1,000 responses back within a week from women telling me that they were desperate for shoes, telling me what kind of shoes they wanted as well, so that I knew what to go forward with. But interestingly, I applied for a bank loan with Virgin. So they've got really good sort of startup loans. And I went through all their workshops and everything. And I came up with this plan of what I was going to do. And I had these survey responses from women. And I wanted to borrow £25,000 to start my business. And they said to me, they rejected me and said, you've proven that there's a need there, but you haven't proven that you've created the solution to that need. And I said, that is very difficult to do before you start. You know, you can, if you've got people saying, we want this and we want that, and you say, I'm going to make it for them, that's kind of as much as you could do. But they flat out rejected. And I was like, okay, fine. So I had to take extra shifts at the shopping channel. I ended up having to launch a year later. I cleared out every single bit of my savings account, and I ended up managing to scrape together £26,000 to start the business with. So I launched the business with £26,000, which is a hell of a lot of money, certainly by my standards. I feel like it is. They do say that most shoe brands cost £50,000 to start an independent shoe brand. I started it with £26,000, which to me, you know, if I lost that would have been devastating. But I knew it was in savings and I knew it wouldn't be in debt. And I started and I launched, and I have never put a single penny back in the business since that 26,000.
It's been snowballing, so it's been growing.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic. It's and I'm sure the people listening are just going to be like, this is probably, everyone's like scribbling their notes down because this is so interesting. But I want to pull out a few key points that you made, which I think are really important. And first of all, you know, like £250,000 in year 3 is pretty staggering. So congratulations, amazing.
Thank you.
And also purely organic growth. I completely hear you. I think that, you know, whoever says you could have sold 4 times that much, it's tough. You know, advertising gets more expensive every year.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally get what you're saying about validating that concept. You wanted to really refine it, really hone it. And you know that when you do put money behind advertising, or if you put money behind advertising, reaching more people, you've really honed the message and the fact that, you know, you know what the product is that people love. Obviously, you'll always be evolving the product, but you have a really good idea and you get so much feedback. The other thing that I just want to pull out is something that I think is really interesting for your story, and I think often is overlooked by people, is the amount of research that you've done. So you talked about doing, I think, first off, to get 1,000 responses from your blog, from your questionnaire in a week. That is a really good indicator of the level of engagement that you've got in your audience, which I'm sure is another big recipe, you know, part of your recipe for success. People often overlook this piece about the research. So how long do you think, you said you talked about starting a year later. So how long from this first concept to the first shoes being available to ship to customers, how long was that whole process, do you think?
So I would say when I started looking at factories and design and everything was 19 months, but I would say I was researching before that. Firstly, I would say, so there's kind of two parts to my research. There was the part that was very deliberate, that I was doing knowing full well that I was going to have a shoe brand. And there was also the fact that I am my customer, and I had spent 33 years, 32 years by then, whatever it was at that point, or certainly my adult life, just looking for shoes desperately and knowing about sizing and what brands were doing sizing well and what brands weren't doing sizing well, and also what was available and what wasn't available and what kind of price points they were. So I lived and breathed tall fashion anyway. So I knew how customers bought shoes. I knew their understanding of measurements, because a lot of the time, for example, so I start my shoes at a size, in the UK it's a size 8 to a size 12, but I go by European sizes. I say a size 42 to a size 46, and some of my shorter friends with smaller feet say, oh, I don't know European sizes, no one's going to know their European size. And I'm like, trust me, tall women know their European size, and they know their European size better than they know their UK size. And the reason for that is very complicated, and I could go off on a big tangent telling you. It's basically because the scales are so out of whack by the time you get to larger sizes that women are going, is that a 42.9 or a 43.9? And so I always go by the European size. But people who would start this brand without having prior experience of being a tall woman and living and breathing that life would not know that. And so it's about having that experience that helps you to cultivate that language with your customer in a way that is, they understand you on a really deep level. So that was my first bit of research. And I'd say when you're making a product where you are the customer, which not everyone does. A lot of people make products and they know full well that they wouldn't buy that product themselves. And which sounds really silly, but I see a lot of people doing it. They wouldn't spend that money on it. They wouldn't buy it themselves, but they want to get a product out there. But I knew full well that this was definitely, I was my customer. I was, buying the product. I remember writing this brief beforehand, just saying Otto and Ivy is blah, 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 blah. Our customer is, and I described this woman, and my friend Shirley read it and she went, Laura, you've just described you. She said, down to your hair colour. Like, you literally said, she often goes for a balayage. It was so specific. And Shirley was like, you literally just put yourself on paper here. And I was like, oh yeah, I have. But then that's very helpful if I'm wanting to, buy the shoes and that sort of thing. And also, you're welcome to buy my shoes if you already have a hair colour. I just happen to have this idea of a person in my head who happened to be 33 and have 2 children and have blondie brown hair.
Yeah, but also would suggest that she spent a certain amount of money on her appearance, right? Right?
Yes.
So
I mean, I've turned up to the podcast today. No one can see me at home, but I've got soaking wet hair and no makeup on and look absolutely awful. But yeah, basically I knew exactly who my customer was and how I was going to talk to them. But then I also did a lot of research in terms of putting that survey out there. And the survey was I asked so many questions. Do you want pointed shoes? Do you want round toe shoes? Do you find that shoes that are available at the moment are too ugly, too expensive, to all of this kind of thing? What price point would you be prepared to spend on shoes? And I really asked the questions were very much like, because obviously if you ask what price point people want to spend on shoes and they know you're looking to price your shoes, they're going to go 20 quid. But I said, if this is your dream pair of shoes, what price would you be prepared to spend on it? Because I knew that I was an independent brand and I wasn't going to be able to do high street kind of prices. So I was very careful about how I did that survey, got the survey responses in, and that very much informed my initial designs. And then I did a focus group in London. So I got together a group of, I think it was about 15, 16 women who had size 43 feet, the same feet as me, which is what I sample in. And I got them all together and tried on the shoes. I hired a footwear technologist who tried on my first samples with these women. The women gave him notes. He took measurements of all of their feet. So these were women who considered themselves to be a size 43. And he measured all of them and tried to work out what that meant then in my customer's mind, what a size 43 was. It turned out some of them were actually a 42, some of them were actually a 44, but we had a good amount of size 43s. And they gave their feedback on some of the designs. And we also just sat there for 2 hours after they'd tried everything on. We sat there drinking Prosecco for 2 hours, just chatting about what we wanted from a footwear brand, what the tool experience was like. And I got so much information just in that 2 hours. And I will say as well that the shoes, I was so embarrassed going into that focus group because the shoes were not ready. They'd done the first samples. They weren't what was in my head. They didn't look brilliant, but I'm so glad that they weren't my final sample that I'd fallen in love with and was perfect, because the time you want to get your feedback is right at the beginning, when you've got these ones where there's still room for change and you're not so wedded to that particular design that you're precious about it. The time to get feedback is then. It's right at that early stage. And so that's what I did. And then I got my first collection out there, which at the time was a very small collection made in an Italian factory. And I did just 100 pairs of shoes, and I launched that in January. Those sold, I got feedback, and actually quite a lot of them came back because the fitting wasn't right. I ended up with about a 40% return rate, which was like gutting. But I made some changes, I made some alterations, and we went again, and it was much better the next time. And I think you have to get so comfortable with feedback, and you have to seek it out. And it's not just about getting the feedback and that informing your designs and making those designs better. It's also about improving that relationship with your customer, because my customer knows that I am open to that feedback. My customer knows there's a constant dialogue there, and they feel like when they're telling me feedback, they're not making a complaint, they're informing the brand and the brand's future, and they feel like a big part of that. So my desperate need for feedback works in two ways. It incrementally has improved the product. So our product now is 1,000,000 times better than it was 3 years ago, just because I've taken those baby steps to get the fit much better. I mean, our returns rate is really low now for a shoe brand.
Wow. So amazing. And also just to say, like, I think what I love about your story as well is the resilience, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who would have got a 40% returns rate and just been like, oh, forget this.
Yeah, I think, well, this is the funny thing, actually. This is combined in my highlights and my advice that I'm going to give you later. But I'm a bit of a perfectionist, or I certainly was a bit of a perfectionist. And I've had a lot of therapy to kind of shake that perfectionism out of me. And what I didn't realize is that I'm the kind of perfectionist, this is what my therapist taught me, is that I'm the kind of perfectionist naturally. And if something goes wrong, then, I give up. This is before I started a business. I just gave up and was like, I don't want to do that. Or if I think that I'm going to fail at something, I don't want to try because I'm going to get embarrassed. And when you have a business, you cannot live your life like that. You have to get more comfortable with things not being perfect, and with failure, and with listening to people's feedback, because it is constructive, and it is so important to get down and dirty with feedback and know that actually it's okay and that it's going to improve. And it's been really hard at times. Sometimes I have been desperate to give up. And then little things have happened on this journey that have made me realize, no, I can't. I absolutely cannot give up. So for instance, and I'm not very woo-woo, I'm not very into I wasn't very into the whole manifestation thing, but basically just before I started my business, I had a list of women who I wanted to wear my shoes. So famous women who I knew had big feet. And one of them was Caitlyn Jenner. And obviously I have no connection to Caitlyn Jenner, part of the Kardashian family. Why would I have a connection to Caitlyn Jenner? And a week after I started my business, a week after I launched Otto and Ivy, when I was feeling a bit low because I'd had a couple of people say, oh, they're not quite the right fit for me.
Yeah.
A friend of mine said, oh, I'm doing the sound on an interview. Caitlyn Jenner's being interviewed by Roman Kemp in Brighton, and I'm doing the sound for them. Would you like me to get a pair of shoes to her? And I was thinking, oh, yeah, that'd be amazing. But in my head, I was also thinking, these shoes cost £150. And if she doesn't wear them, that's a big amount of money when you first start a business. And I didn't have a huge amount of stock. And I thought, if she doesn't if they don't work for her, then that's a big loss to me at the time. And then I thought about it, and then I thought, no, I've got to do it. So I rang him, and he said, I'm really sorry, I've got traveled to Brighton already, but you can come if you want to, and you can come and meet her. I was like, oh, okay. And I still didn't know whether to do it or not. I was at my sister's baby shower that day. I had loads of people at my house, and I was like, oh, shall I go? And they said, just go. Tim and I bundled up lots of shoes in the back of the car, and we drove to Brighton. And I got to Brighton, and the producer said, well, do you want me to introduce you to her? And I can maybe get you into her dressing room and you can chat to her. And I was like, oh my God, okay. So I got the shoes, and I was walking to her dressing room, and I have never had a feeling like it. Because in my head, I was thinking, oh my gosh, what if the shoes don't fit? The shoes won't fit, the shoes won't fit. And then the hairs started standing on my arms, and I was like, Laura, of course the shoes are going to fit. Because why the hell are you standing outside Caitlyn Jenner's dressing room? Why would you be here if those shoes were not destined to fit her? And so the producer took me in, and he said, oh, this is my friend Laura, and she started a brand for tall women. And Caitlyn was like, oh my God, I love entrepreneurs, and I'm desperate to find shoes to fit. And she tried them on, and we were videoing it, and she said, oh my gosh, I feel like Cinderella. And it was, everyone in the room was crying, like it was just mental. And then the next day, I'd put it up online, and a friend of mine who I'd worked with 20 years ago in a play is now a writer at the Daily Mail. And he said, oh, Laura, I've seen this story. I'd love to put it on the Daily Mail. And I was like, okay. And so then that night it was on the Daily Mail. And it's so funny because things do go wrong, and you do feel like giving up, and things can be really hard. And then stuff like that happens. And I'm like, no, come on, you're not here just to give up. Like, there is, the universe is sending you stupid signs saying you have to keep going.
I feel like we could talk all day, but we do have to wrap this up. But I'd love to hear from you then. No, don't say sorry. It's been brilliant. I'd love to hear from you then. So obviously the kind of theme is all about building it on a budget. So clearly from you, it's all about this connection with the audience, learning, like really getting to know your audience and genuine connection with them, bringing them on the journey. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, this sounds great, but I just don't even really know where to start. What does this even mean? Take them on the journey. But what's your sort of top tip then for someone listening in terms of who wants to connect more with their audience?
So in shopping telly, we always talk about how, you might be showing a ring, and you can say this ring is a 1-carat diamond ring, and it's really sparkly and beautiful, and it's this gram weight of gold, and you can show that, and you might get 5 sales. But if you say, oh my goodness, this ring, and be truthful about this, but this reminds me of a ring that my mother had when I was really little, and she used to have this jewelry box, and she never used to wear this ring. It was just for special occasions. And she just used to open the door, and I'd see this ring, and sometimes she'd let me try it on. And I remember watching her at this jewelry box thinking, that is what it is to be a grown-up. And every time she put it on, I knew that she was going somewhere special and she'd feel amazing. And it was like, that was the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle. She'd put on this beautiful dress, she'd have her hair done, and then she'd put that ring on. And I knew that was it. She was going to have the best night. And things like that lifestyle it up. So you need to not just be talking about the shoe or the dress. You need to be talking about how it is going to make you feel. You need to be talking about how when you wear that dress, you're going to feel a certain way when you give that presentation or when you go to that wedding. And I think as well, talking from the heart and being vulnerable is so, so important. I really believe that if I have a bad day in my business, I can tell my customers about it. It might be a curated version, I'm not going to give every single detail, but I think it's really important that your customer can relate to you and they go, oh yeah, no, I have that experience with my mum and her jewelry box when I was a little girl, or yeah, actually, I know that I've had those experiences where I've been feeling like the gangly, lanky girl at a school disco, and it helps that connection. So I think rather than think, how can I make myself sound good and how can I make myself brilliant? How can I find those vulnerabilities that I can share with other people? How can I take my life experience and have other people connect with it? I think that's really important. It's about lifestyling your product. And especially if you've got a product like mine where it's fulfilling a particular need, then there's so much material there, because that means that you've had a lack. You've had times where you haven't been able to go into the shops and where you've been upset and that sort of thing. So I think I'm trying to think of an actual takeaway though as a tip, because that all sounds a bit wishy-washy and airy-fairy. But I would probably say the best thing to start with is really knuckle down to your why. Why are you doing something? And maybe once a week, having a post that is purely dedicated to your why, having a post or a video where you really knuckle down and say, this is why I'm doing this. For instance, my whys are, I do not want another teenage girl to go through what I went through, where I was constantly going to school discos wearing shoes that I didn't want to wear, or going to interviews and not having shoes to wear, or having to plan 6 months in advance to get shoes for school disco. So that's like a really important part of my why. Another part of my why is I want to, kind of said it quite succinctly in that one why. but keep coming back to your why every week, and maybe do one post that really explains it so that people know you're not just in it for the money. Because I don't think many business owners are really, lots of business owners, but a lot of small fashion businesses, they're not just in it for the money. So you really do need to get that across. And I think actually some people, if the word entrepreneur can sound a little bit Del Boy, and people think, oh, you're just trying to make a quick buck, or you're trying to do this, that, and the other. But actually, I think if you were obsessed with money, you probably wouldn't want to take the risk with starting a fashion business. It's a big outlay. You've got to really be passionate. You've got to be really working hard on it every single day and really loving your customer. So
share that passion with your audience.
Share that passion.
No, I think that's a really great point. I always think, and this is probably more applicable to service businesses than product businesses, but I always think of the phrase that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care, which is, I always think about that, because it's true. It's like you can be super knowledgeable, but actually if your motivation, or, it's much more about how much you connect with people, for sure.
Definitely. Well, my husband came back he works for TripAdvisor, and he came back from a talk that someone was giving there. So they were talking about the founder of Nike trainers. They talk about the founder of Nike, called Phil Knight. So they had a guy that was presenting, and Tim said that this sentence stuck with him, and he wanted to tell me it when he got home. And he said that the guy who was speaking had said, people didn't buy from Phil Knight because he made the very best trainers in the world. They bought from Phil Knight because he cared so much about running. And I thought about it, and it stuck with me so much, because people really do know how much I care about it. And I think as well, that's one of the reasons why I've kept it quite small. I've not been doing my marketing yet while I refine that product, because actually if something does go wrong, or there is a mistake, or there is a sizing issue, people are much kinder to you when they know it's a person and they care about it, and they've not done it to try and fob you off or to fool you. They want to know what's going on. They want to know what might be wrong, what might be right about it. And so people are much, much kinder. You're going to get the odd bad egg, but generally speaking, my customers are just wonderful and lovely, and I couldn't really ask for anything more. So
well, fantastic. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our chat. Do you want to just tell everyone where they can find out more about you and your amazing shoes?
The shoes are by Otto and Ivy. The website is ottoandivy.com, and you can follow on Instagram, Otto and Ivy Shoes. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. That's what I've stuck to. I haven't ventured into Twitter or into TikTok.
No,
not yet. I'm thinking I might have to take the plunge soon. I've just been building up Facebook and Instagram and doing what I can on those. But maybe I'm going to have to try and be a TikTok star.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It was so fantastic to hear all of the behind the scenes of Laura's business. I really enjoyed it. I've been watching Laura's business grow, as I said, for 4 years now. So it's great to hear the inside story, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Why not come over to Instagram at Resilient Retail Club, say hi, let me know what you thought of today's episode. Why not share where you are, where you're listening to the podcast? I always love to see that. If you have a moment, then do please rate and review the podcast. You can rate it inside the Spotify app. You can also rate and write a review inside iTunes, and I deeply appreciate every single one of the reviews. It means the absolute world to me, both the ratings and the reviews. I really appreciate you taking the time to do it, and it helps to get the word out to more people about the podcast. And of course, if you subscribe or follow the podcast, then you'll be the first to know about every new episode. See you next week. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, then I invite you to check out resilientretailclub.com. The Resilient Retail Club is the membership for anyone wanting to start, grow, or scale a profitable product business. No more trawling Google trying to find the answers to your questions or wading through general business advice that speaks mainly to service-based businesses. Whether you're still at the idea stage or you've been going for a while but want to get more focused and organised when it comes to your business, the Resilient Retail Club is the place for you. With a library of courses tailored to creative product businesses, several live sessions a month, and a supportive and active community, the Resilient Retail Club is the perfect membership to help you hit your goals faster. Check it out at resilientretailclub.com.